Just sitting for a moment. Try and be forward in your chair if you can do so comfortably. So look for the posture that we're going to aspire to, even if we're not going to maintain it the whole time. The feet below your knees, forwards enough so that you can angle forwards and feel 30% of your weight in your feet. A general sense of settling into the chair, feel as though your hips sinking into the chair, and presumably probably got quite a hard chair, so most of that's going to be about softening in your hips rather than anything specific to the chair, and you're not going to sort of bend your knees anymore or anything like that. And just a feeling that your back with that slight angle forwards is able to support the front of your body, your rib cage and all the internal organs. And then rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. And your arm. And the other side. Up part of your chest. Your belly. And your legs. Feet out. Sit back in the chair, feel your weight dropping down. And well, it's slightly different. The general feeling of releasing in your whole body, of course, specifically the front part of your body, which is often when we come to an upright position, we often pull our belly in, tighten our chest just out of force of habit. So just become familiar with that feeling so that it's something you can begin to feed in to your body through your intent. This is what you want to be feeling, this feeling of releasing, as I say, in the front of the body, elsewhere as well, shoulders dropping back and so on and so forth. A couple of slow, gentle breaths. And then return into the upright position. Finding a position which you feel you can maintain comfortably, so you might not be quite so far forwards. And just slowly turning your head. So in Tai Chi, the aspiration is always to some kind of notion of perfect posture. The recognition is that that probably doesn't exist, and even if we could get to it, it would only be there for a few moments. But what's important really is that we feel there is some progression there, but also the very act of checking our posture and recognizing signs like that, releasing feeling in certain parts of the body, brings our attention into this particular moment. Hands in front of your shoulders. And that idea of being in the moment, not in a way that cuts you off from the past or what's coming in the future, but just this is the place that we sit and stand in, that we move from, is really at the heart of the whole meditational process, and then going forward. In that moment, in that process, if you like, in that state of mind and body, we can get a sense of just releasing, both again in mind and body. Hands down to your side. That moment of releasing can be really important. You know, those moments when you know, you're standing in the supermarket queue and for some reason the person in front is taking longer, and that can be very irritating. We get quite agitated, and then we carry that agitation forward with us, and maybe, you know, sort of walk out the supermarket, somebody steps in front of us and we get more agitated, and so on and so forth. These build up in layers. If we can, at those times, bring our attention back to, say, for instance, bring our intent back to, oh yeah, releasing in the shoulders, releasing in the chest or the knees or something like that, we break that cycle. It's a cycle that increases its momentum. We can break it, then we start to neutralize some of that strain, some of that agitation, and we cease to carry it into the next moment and the next situation. Winding around. This is something that is very much important in the martial side of Tai Chi, because we are, by its very nature, in that sense, dealing with an uncertain and unpredictable and probably, you know, quite stressful situation. Go back the other way. But it has, you know, applications in many, many areas of our lives. You know, I'm sure we've all experienced that, you know, the bad day at work ends up with you having an argument at home, and so on and so forth. You can begin to avoid those. Rest your hands, and then easing forwards, weight going into your feet, and a gentle push back. There's no suggestion in what I'm saying that we simply put up with the situation. The martial arts don't put up with the situation, but you have to deal with what is happening at that particular point and develop some sense of clarity, shall we call it. So the aspiration to perfect posture, perfect movement, has the obvious physical benefit that we are improving our movement, we're improving our posture, but whether or not that's recognizable is perhaps secondary to this sense that we're able to be in the moment, but with a clear awareness that, you know, there's another moment and another moment and another moment. And in Tai Chi, as a meditative art, we can identify certain key points where, you know, we can choose where and when we make that effort. And in Tai Chi terms, one very key one is going to be the transfer of your weight and the moment of arrival. Chances are in between you may lose that centered quality, but we have the opportunity to regain it. If we don't do that, then we get to here and we're a little bit out in one way or another. We go back and we haven't made the correction, and we're a little bit further out, and so on and so forth. So the kind of internal view that I'm suggesting actually helps to generate this quality of stillness and awareness. Turning slightly. So as we go through the session, particularly people who know the exercises better, see whether you're anticipating. You know, we do one movement, you know there's another movement coming on. Are you in a hurry to get there? And if you are, just remind yourself this is not a race. You come back to the movement that you're doing. You may even discover something new about the movement that you thought you knew well. Turning the other way. And then around. And even with this one, which is a continual movement and it's a circle, there are still these key points on the circle where your weight is, the majority of your weight is in the foot or a hip. And it really is just a split second. When you get used to what you're looking for, it takes almost no time at all to find it. Go back the other way. Coming back to the center. Step it out. On the other side. Hands down to your sides. Turn your hand palm forwards. Bird folds its wings, combining the rotation of your arms with the transfer of your weight. So just that moment of punctuation, that slight sense of resting that doesn't interrupt the flow of the movement, hence the image of the punctuation mark, the comma in the sentence. Just beginning to appreciate the significance of that. It may be, for instance, that in the movement back, you've stiffened up in your back a little bit. It's quite common to find that. So we come back, and rather than going straight forwards, get that moment of releasing before we make the move. And then fisherman cast net. We're also able to observe what is still happening in those moments. Fisherman cast a net. It's very easy to misinterpret what's going on. Is it just forwards and backwards? Is it the arms moving? Whatever, there's all sorts of things. But in fact, what we find is here, if I exaggerate, I'm going forwards. I can feel the opening in front of my shoulder. As I go in that moment, I put the comma in the sentence. My hand is still swinging through. Likewise, going back, I settle into my hips. Hand is still going through. So sometimes the comma, the punctuation reveals movements that without the punctuation would actually be too busy to recognize. And then rolling the ball. And then pigeon spreads its wings. And chest opening and closing. The final position as you go back should have your arms still in front of the body. Don't do this because then you're straining in the chest. The feeling in belly and chest, particularly perhaps in the rib cage, I would describe as opening and closing or expanding and contracting. And then pushing wave. So we develop a sensitivity to change and movements within the body. And it's the nature of Tai Chi again, coming through from the martial side of it, that we also remain aware of what's happening around us. We use terms like sensitivity, listening. Grandmaster Chen Xiaowang of the Chen family, Tai Chi lineage, uses the phrase that we look ahead and listen behind. I love the phrase that comes from a Southern Indian martial art called Kaliparat, where they use the phrase, when the body becomes all eyes. One more time. The hands loosely fisted. And then opening your fingers, winding your arms out. Pressing forwards again. After this one, bringing your hands back, turning them palm down, changing to polishing the table. Still aware as you go around, obviously you can think about what your hands are doing, but remember, you turn, the weight goes into one hip, you go forwards, weight goes into the leg, and then you turn, it goes across to the opposite leg, you come back to the remaining hip, you turn, start the cycle over again, and turn in the other way. So you're aware of those points in the back of your mind in much the same way that if you're out for a walk, you're just aware of certain landmarks that help to keep you on track. And so aware of those points where there's the reminder of that quality of releasing. One more in each direction. And your hands palm up, chin up, and your back lengthening and contracting. So when we do begin to quieten down, we're much more aware of small changes, sensations of movement within our body. And the more we become aware of those, the more we quieten down. These factors, as there's so many things inside Chi, reinforce each other. One more time. Change to the wild goose. And then part in the clouds. Going back to the first of these, rooting down and doing them as a full sequence of 3. Rooting down, don't rush this. When you get to the bottom of the movement, turn your hands out, and you're ready to go into the wild goose. And when your hands come back to hip height, you go into part in the clouds. Coming back, starting the sequence over again. As you do rooting down, just feels a bit of expansion in the area of your belly, lower back. And then belly up into the solar plexus. and then belly, solar plexus, and upper part of your chest into your head. But gradually, you know, as we go through the set, we go back to rooting down now. We just increase the degree of expansion in the body. And that has a direct impact on breathing, circulation. But for people interested in working with breathing patterns and breathing technique, we're trying to breathe so our lungs were down in our belly in the first instance, so that we recognize the feeling of the filling up, but then again belly and up into the solar plexus, a gradual spread upwards, and then belly, solar plexus, and up into the upper part of the chest. And again, last time. And then dragon plucks the stars from the sky, following that same broad pattern, but on one side of the body, belly, solar plexus, chest. A pattern that, of course, is also reflected in our breathing, if we want to work with our breathing. So we begin to understand how it's necessary to get our posture correct, for our breathing can really be correct. If you're sitting there and say you're tight in your chest, you try and breathe in, and you'll create more tension this way. One more time on each side. Both hands together, pushing in two directions. Do one more round of this. And one foot, scooping the sea, looking at the sky. And then changing to grasping the tiger's ears, hands loosely fisted, upper body tilting forwards, hips sinking back. On the side. To remind yourself that we want to be aware in the back of our minds of these points where there's the potential for letting go. As we begin to associate them in our minds with that process of letting go, say, for instance, weight transfer, as I've said, is a good point, then eventually the very act of transferring your weight will trigger that releasing feeling. Most of the time. And then grasping the tiger's ears. Good. Just resting for a moment. Then hold the ball with your right hand on top, your left hand underneath. And pressing the ball and feeling that, almost like it was very resistant. So rather than just your hand moving, it's almost, and I'm exaggerating, almost like you're kind of squeezing the ball in. It's quite strong, and you're using your back and so on and so forth. That's the sort of feeling as the hands come together. And then, of course, there's the opposite movement, the push out. Again, pressing into your center, yin, extended out from your center, yang. And again, we can begin to notice sensations, feelings, observations of what's happening within the body that are associated with those terms. Now, as you come back to hold the ball, let your weight slip into your right hip, going forward into your left leg for part the wild horse's mane. And you'll see, obviously there's a difference in the weight change and so on and so forth, but the hands come together closely, one slides out. One more time. and just let your hands rest. Okay, and then throwing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Shoulder and arm. And the other side. Of the chest. Belly. Pushing your heels up. Pumping, pulsing action in your legs. And then going around in a circle in one direction, your knees. Change direction. Okay. And then stand in. So looking ahead, listening behind, the body becomes all eyes. One of my early teachers is again another very, very memorable image, standing on a hill, looking out over a valley, giving you the sense that you're not in the valley, you're not looking at a specific point, but you're just aware of the whole vista. You could interpret that standing by the sea, looking out at the horizon. Again and again, ideas that bring us back to this particular moment. And again, this is not a denial of the rest. I came across a very interesting quote from a teacher called Al Huang, who I never actually worked with myself, but I knew people who did. He was talking about the Tai Chi posture and say a movement like say here, which is called Shom the Lut, but really any movement, the weight's on one leg, you're facing forwards. To start a double-handed push, for instance, it could be something like that. And he says that we root down, we let our hips sink, and this is not just a physical response, but actually he said what we do is the root represents the past in the context that he's using it. So this is you sit on your past. Your past has got you here, and you're looking ahead. You're looking into the future, but you're not sitting on the past and leaning back into it and thinking, "Oh, I wish that hadn't happened 20 years ago," or something like that. Neither are you sitting on your past and kind of leaning forward, saying, "Yeah, it's coming." Both unsend you. The best way to meet the future is in the present moment, if that makes sense. So this is very much something which, as I said, applies in the martial side of things, dealing with just a situation, even in a very friendly partner work situation where you've got a good partner and so on and so forth. It's very rare that they'll be able to do it perfectly. So there's always going to be some discrepancy and some kind of adaptation about how you respond. And let alone a situation that's perhaps where someone's trying to push you or something, something like that. You can't make an absolute prediction, and your best way of managing the situation is to remain alert from one moment to another. Think about crossing the street. We have a formula for crossing the street, you know, whether depending on how old you are, it's the Green Cross Code or something like that. But we don't rely 100% on that formula. We stop at the curb, we look, and go through whatever phase, but we don't just stop, look, and then walk out into the road. You might see there's a gap there, and then suddenly realise that you didn't see that person on the electric scooter could come along very fast, or maybe a car turns around the corner, or somebody's going faster than you thought they were going, or there's any number of factors which mean that although we've made a decision to cross the road, actually that could change at any moment and may need to change at any moment. So this is not an invitation to just be asleep in the moment. And again, the meditation effect of that is to break this cycle of hurrying. Sometimes we can feel as though we're running downhill, can't we? And it puts the brakes on a little bit. So sinking down, and again, doing this as a little sequence, rooting down. And it's those moments at the end of each cycle, whether it's the weight moving or the hips sinking, changing to wild goose. It's those moments when we make the change, part in the clouds. Even a simple sequence like this, but certainly the Tai Chi forms that we go through, it's very, very easy to lose the sequence. Happens to everybody. And so those, here, if I start thinking about the wild goose, I start, I'm not sure what's going on, and I see it a lot in people learning forms, see it in myself learning forms, must get on to the next movement. But actually, the best chance of doing that movement is from the previous movement, done fully and properly. My first teacher constantly used to say, the seed of the next movement is in the movement that you're doing. Make sure you plant the seed properly. And it requires an alertness rather than a kind of falling asleep to actually take in that particular moment. So this is not taking our attention anywhere else. And of course, one of the things we discover at that point is that the sheer joy of the movement, the fluidity of the movement, the flow. Because we're not in a hurry, we're not anxious to move on to the next movement. And shake hands. Many years ago, I started doing early morning sessions or pre-work sessions, and I had a hall that we went to, and somebody came along to it who came to my other classes. But at the end of the first session, they said that they couldn't enjoy it. And they had to stop coming because they said, although I said, this is when I'm finishing, and they knew that I was a good timekeeper, I very rarely am late or anything like that. And although they knew that if I finished at, I can't remember the time now, but if I finished at that time, they still had plenty of time to get to work. So there was there was no kind of problem there on paper, and yet during the class they kept thinking about, oh, am I going to be late for work? They were in that I've got to get to work mode. And they were in a slightly strange environment, albeit one that, you know, it was quite clear what was going on. As I say, there was going to be no problem. And they said they just couldn't settle into the movements because they were constantly thinking, am I going to be late for work? And it's like we often get into that way of thinking. So this thing about being in the moment does have massive implications for the release of stress and anxiety. This is why arts like mindfulness are so prevalent these days, and often talked about in the context of mental health. So now have 1 foot forwards and identify those moments of punctuation. Ideally, we would maintain those qualities in between. But we also know that things can go wrong. You know, things change. We go to cross the road and suddenly we realise there's somebody roaring up the road on a motorbike, or so on and so forth. Something that throws you out or whatever. And ideally that wouldn't happen, but we know it's going to happen. It's the nature of life. So every time the weight moves, there's that moment when we can recapture that stillness. And it cuts both ways. The stillness helps the settling down, but the actual transfer of the weight will actually help you to cultivate that stillness. Or maybe it's releasing the hips, for instance. And then sitting back and raising your toes, going forwards, pushing your back knee forwards. So again, it's not that nothing is happening, and often what's happening is really key. But what it isn't is a kind of, oh, I've got to do this. And then stepping in. So I quite often find, for instance, that sometimes, as you probably know, I'll go into great detail and say things like the step in, and I'll really break it down into its various stages, spend some time with it. And on many occasions, I've stood in front of a group and they've done it really well on one side. You know, they've built it up from the beginning through each of, you know, there could be 4 or 5 different stages, and they're stable, and I can see they're moving well, and so on and so forth. Shake out, and then they change over, and half the class will be going straight into this. They'll be doing that, and I have to say to them, slow down. You've actually jumped 4 or 5 stages, or 3 or 4 stages. And is that the end of the world? Well, maybe. Not necessarily the end of the world, but they were moving well before, and suddenly they're not moving well. It's like sometimes that anxiety about what we're doing, or even that drive to rush, wherever that comes from, actually forces us to go faster. And sometimes, of course, that's appropriate. You know, if you're strolling across the road and you suddenly realise something's coming for you, moving faster is appropriate. Nothing is excluded necessarily, but nothing is taken for granted. So then we raise our toes. In those moments, we recognise that are my hips out of line or whatever. And again, these become triggers for the quietening, and the quietening exposes them. We view them. So you want to get to a point where, you know, that moment of agitation in the supermarket queue actually triggers the next response, just as the in-breath triggers the out-breath. That our response is not to continue the agitation, but we train ourselves in these qualities of song, of rooting down, of quietening and everything that's involved in those, so that they do become our conditioned response, and then stepping in, or our initial conditioned response, I should say. Maybe things that happen after that, as I keep saying. And then stepping through. And then going back. And shake out. There's one particular shop in my area that I use regularly. Very chatty and friendly in there. I remember one day just going in there and thinking, you know, oh, can't I'm in a hurry. I wish we could get on with it, because they're chatting to the person in front. And then I realised, why am I in a hurry? I wasn't actually in a hurry. Sometimes I might be. And I've even been known in that particular shop to pick up what I want and say, "Can I just pay you for that? I've got to," and that's fine. They're fine with that. But actually, you know, it's very easy to get into that. I'm in a hurry. I'm constantly in a hurry. So you know, these are very easy habits to fall into. So have your right foot forward. Start with fisherman cast net. Then sinking back and turning, wind blows the willows. Don't rush this. The point where you really start to do the turn and your arms swing out is that same point of settling into the leg. There's a little bit of overlap, but that comes quite naturally. Good. Put your left foot forwards. Fisherman cast in there. Observing the way your arms swing through. At the same time, just aware of, you know, what's happening in the pelvis, your shoulders, the head, the back. And wind blows to the sinking back and turning, letting the turn redirect your arms. So we don't have to think too much about the arms. That can be a bit confusing. If you move your weight, if you turn your body, you'll notice that your arms are being moved in a particular direction. Just let them follow that direction. So forward, raise the back heel, bring the rear foot in, or the other way around if you're going to go backwards first. Maybe just raising the leg and dragonfly skims the water. Key thing here, hips, dropping back. Nice sort of like springy feeling in the leg. Good, and then stepping back. And then bring the feet down. Good. Go back to your chair. So this area is where the final exercise that we always do in Base Tiger Return to the Mountain, I think in many ways comes to the fore because it really emphasizes the processes that happen in our body and our mind in that drawing inwards moment. And that's often the thing that we miss, and particularly when I see people doing a Tai Chi form and they're getting all flustered. What they really need at that moment is to remember what it feels like in Embrace Tiger Return to the moment. And so this emphasizes it. And again, I would say in everyday life, these are moments, not long processes, but it's a good way to end the session with that emphasis on the stillness within the movement. So hands down to your sides and then push out. And the rest of the movement is that drawing in, feeling what's going on in your body, how gravity is working on your hips, your shoulders, the sensations in your chest, in your belly, in your arms. That little moment of just punctuation before you start again. One more time. And rest. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody.